Hello, everyone, and welcome to Alta Live. My name is Beth Spotswood. I am the digital editor here at Alta Journal, and I am so excited to welcome you today to a conversation on Pioneertown, which is out in the Mojave Desert. Stacey Grenrock Woods wrote a really incredible, eye-opening article, Will Success Spoil Pioneertown? It's in the current issue of Alta. And we are going to talk with Stacey today, along with Sue Burnett, a Pioneertown resident. She's known as the resident complainer of Pioneertown.
Self-appointed, yeah.
Self-appointed resident complainer of Pioneertown. And we're going to chat with both of them about what's happened to this really kind of incredible old school Western town in the Mojave Desert that has grown in popularity with influencers, Airbnb hosts, an array of cowpoke cosplay characters, as Stacey pointed out in the article. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And you're here for it, and I'm excited to welcome you. Before we begin, a little bit about our guest. Susan Burnett is a former LA stylist, and she's a longtime resident of Pioneertown. And Stacey, who you may know from previous Alta Lives or our Ask a Californian column, is a regular contributor to Esquire and former correspondent for The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. She writes and consults on various TV shows and had a recurring role on Fox's Arrested Development. Her first book is I, California. Before we begin, if you are unfamiliar, Alta Journal is an award-winning quarterly magazine and website focused on California and the West. We are big, we are beautiful, and we have really cool articles by people like Stacey. If you are like what we do here, we have weekly free events, Alta Live, monthly California Book Club. We'll be at the LA Times Festival of Books this coming weekend. We've got a issue party at Pages in Manhattan Beach. It's a really cool bookstore in Manhattan Beach. Next Saturday, the 27th, next Saturday, free, everyone's welcome. Check out our website, altaonline.com. You can join us for $50 a year and get gorgeous Alta issues in your mailbox, or become a digital member for $3 a month. Please do consider supporting the work we do. We work really hard, and we want to welcome you as members and supporters of the work we do. So with that, let's dive in. This conversation will be recorded and posted to altaonline.com later this afternoon. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to ask your pioneer questions of Stacey and Sue. There's also a chat. We love to let people know where they're zooming in from. I see Sacramento, Oakland, Pasadena. So please do chime in and let us know where you're zooming in from today. Washington, D.C., hello.
Yeah, Washington,
I am in Novato, California, up north. Stacey, let's start with you. Where are you?
I am in Highland Park in the world's most humid Airbnb.
And Sue, where are you zooming in from today?
I'm zooming in from Joshua Tree, California, at my job. I run a little boutique motel, and I'm at work today. So, and it's gorgeous here.
Thank you
Sunny.
both for joining us. Stacey is the author of this article. Let's start with you. Can you give us the super abridged history of Pioneertown?
Okay, Pioneertown was started in the 50s by a bunch of Hollywood types who thought it would be a good idea, instead of putting up and breaking down sets every time they want to shoot a Western, to build a little de facto town with fake storefronts and everything, so they could just leave up and shoot all the time, but that would also accommodate the actors and the crew when they were done shooting. So you could shoot all around this beautiful landscape that looks like the Old West, because it is the Old West. And then when you were done, you could just relax in the actual set. So it was a real movie set, a fake town, a real fake movie town.
Is Pioneertown an incorporated town? Is
No.
there like a city council?
No. Oh, no.
So what is it part of?
It's an unincorporated part of San Bernardino County.
Got it. now Stacey has lived, recently left Pioneertown after about 2 years there. But Sue, how long have you been in Pioneertown, and what drew you to this little unincorporated area of San Bernardino County?
Well, I came to the Morongo Basin in the 90s camping. And I was living in the Bay Area. And in the late 90s, I had a friend, Tanya, who moved here and threw a big birthday party at the bowling alley in Pioneertown. And I would say 50 people came from, various places. And the bowling lanes were operating, and the locals were drinking beer at the bar. And I just fell in love with it. And so in 2001, I moved to Pioneertown. And then, you have to remember the desert was really different back then. There was the national park, but the attendance was really low, and I don't know the numbers, but I would probably guess 250, 300,000 people at that time maybe were coming to the park. And there was no work here really. It wasn't a place where you could just come and have something to do, unless you were a policeman or school teacher in Yucca Valley, or, worked for Edison or something like that. So I went back and forth from LA for a long time, and I actually moved away for some time. And then in 2013, I just up and moved back here. I could not. I mean, the desert just was calling to me the whole time that I wasn't here. So, and I moved back in 2013. So I've been here full time since 2013, but have been in the desert since 2001. So, it was funny when I moved back in 2013, people in Pioneertown would be like, well, how do you know Gary Van Seal? Because he was an old cowboy that, started, he ran cattle with his grandfather and father in the Mojave Desert, as far back as the 60s. And I'd say, oh, well, I lived here before. How do you know Cowboy Pete? Or, well, I used to drink at the bar or whatever. Um, so even though I haven't lived here that whole time, I do know a lot of people that have been here a long time, so.
Stacey, one of the things that you talk about in the article a lot is that Pioneertown was this incredibly special, very small community where everyone knew your name, folks would take care of each other. There was it was a real small, tight-knit community of, I don't know how to put this in any other way, not a lot of assholes. Everyone was cool, and kind of played by these unspoken rules of let's keep Pioneertown authentic and charming, and for people who are respectful of it. When did that when was there this influx of, people there to pose for Instagram photos and open Airbnbs and kind of these, the guy that was all inspired by a psychedelic trip he had, who wants to be in awe all the time? And
Right. Yeah, that would be Clark. He's mentioned in the article. Well, my reporting showed that started around, people pinpoint a time when Miley Cyrus started going to the desert and taking pictures of herself, like at the Joshua Tree sign. And I think it started maybe around, I don't know, 2016,
Yeah.
and then just just exploded during the pandemic. The whole time since about early 2000s, when Robin and Linda took over Pappy and Harriet's, it started to coincide with that, and things started. They started. I think the Paul McCartney show was in 2016 as well. People started to want to come to Pioneertown because they knew about Pappy and Harriet's, and celebrities and people were taking pictures of themselves there. So around 2016 is when I think it started to really take off, and then sort of went crazy during the pandemic.
and for those that haven't had a chance to read your article yet, what is Pappy and Harriet's?
Pappy and Harriet's is an old biker bar restaurant that was opened, I think, Sue, in the 70s. Was
It
it?
was a gas station. It was part of the original Main Street.
Yeah.
And in 71, Frances, Harriet's mom, uh, took the pumps out and turned it into the cantina.
So in around the early 2000s, some people who were going there all the time from New York, named Robin, Celia, and Linda Kranz, they fell in love with the place, and they noticed one day it was for sale, and they decided to buy it and moved to Pioneertown to run it. And when they started doing that, they had no experience. They didn't know what they were doing, but she just started cold calling people and booking shows, and it started to turn around. They started to get, like, I think their first show was Lucinda Williams, and it
Mhm.
started to become this big deal, this big deal in this tiny little place.
And
Yeah,
then,
it was a lot of indie bands. You know, it was an independent. Robin, I think, thought, let's book these independent bands in this little independent venue in this tiny little place, and I think it had kind of a natural, slow progression. You know, she just kept getting bigger and bigger shows, and more people would come out. Um, and then, of course, you know, with the boom of the real boom of social media, you know, that, but I think it started slowly in the beginning. You know, it was kind of a word of mouth, and and you know, insider kind of thing. You know, like people that knew. Um, and then, like Stacey said, around 2015, 2016, I think it was like an exponential explosion. You know, and that's when Paul McCartney played, and which I worked the door. That was incredible. Yeah. I mean, I could spend a half hour just telling you every single detail of that night and how crazy it was. Like the boomer guy that tried to run me over in the truck, and you know, people crying because I worked the door and like begging me to let them in. Some of them people that I know and love, and I had to say no. I mean, I had a guy that worked for Paul McCartney standing behind me the entire time, you know, making sure I wasn't like sneaking people in, or, you know, it was wild. So, you know, and now they sold it, and now it's owned by two other people, and it's very different. You know, it's changed.
the base population of Pioneertown, I think you mentioned in the article, Stacey, was about 500.
Mhm.
And that's kind of when that started to change. I'm curious, Sue, as the self-appointed resident complainer, when did you start getting ticked off? And what are some of the things that have happened that are unacceptable to you as a pioneer townerite?
Well, I have plenty of examples, but I'll just pick a couple. One day, it was a Saturday afternoon, and I was leaving my house, and I drive down a dirt road to Pioneertown Road, and then I go by Pappy's. You know, people always go, well, doesn't Pappy's bother you? They have outdoor shows. No, that doesn't bother me. It ends at 10 or 10:30. You know, and in the past, Pappy's was really our the heart of our community, not just for, I don't know if 500 people live in Pioneertown now, but there weren't that many when I first moved there. In 2013, there were probably like 350 people. Um, and we went to Pappy's all the time. You know, sure, we had tourists that came there, we had shows and stuff, but any given night of the week, you could go to Pappy's and there would be 50 to 100 people in there that know each other, that live in the community. Um, so one night I'm driving out, I drive past Pappy's, I wave at the parking guy or whatever, and I start heading down the mountain road. So Pappy's, you know, is in Pioneertown, which sits about 4 miles above Yucca Valley, and you go up a little windy road to get there. So I'm about to head down that road, and I see off to the right, there's like a clearing, it's private property. Everything pretty much in Pioneertown is private property, with the exception of, well, even the preserve is private. It's just a privately owned preserve that's open to the public. But because there's not a lot of fences or anything, you know, I really started noticing how people would just park themselves up and do crazy stuff like wherever they wanted. So I'm getting ready to drive down Pioneertown Road, and I see off to the right in this little clearing spot like 20 cars and about 50 people, and they have carried all this furniture up into the rocks. They had, you know, a camera crew, they had a film crew. And then I realized there's a girl like with her little clipboard, and she's like checking people in and stuff. And I was like, what is going on? Like, you cannot just show up on somebody's property with 20 cars and 50 people and furniture that you're like carrying up into the boulders. And so I drive up to the girl, that poor girl. I mean, she didn't know what was happening, but I just acted really official. And I said, I need to see your permit. And she was like, permit? And I go, yeah, your permit, you're from the county to have a film shoot here, which I knew she didn't have one because she's on private property. So how could she have gotten it? And I know the person that owns the property, but she kind of was like scattered. And I go, you need to get your boss up here. And so some guy walks up and I go, you have 10 minutes to pack up and get out. And I didn't know if they would do it. I just decided, like to just to take it upon myself to act official or something. And they left. Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay, that was pretty easy. So I'm just going to keep doing that, So when I see the people filming a skateboarding thing in the middle of Pioneertown Road at 4:30 in the afternoon, with, you have to remember people live up there and they drive, the speed limit's 55, which, people driving 70 oftentimes. And they're like filming a guy in the middle of the road on a skateboard with like a dolly camera on a truck. And yeah, so it just happened all of a sudden. It was like, I'd be in my house and I'd hear some noise. It's really quiet where I live. And you hear all this talking, and I go out and there's literally girls on my property, like stripping down and putting on clothes. And, the photographer's assistant holding the big, the light things. And, they're having like a photo shoot in the middle of my yard, just randomly. So,
The
We know
audacity, I
better.
believe the kids say today. What, Stacey?
well, I think people know better if they live somewhere where, here's your house and your house and your yard and your yard. But, I can see when you drive up there, it's just all open and you think, woohoo, we can just go anywhere we want. But that's not really the reality. So, and I grew up in Texas, and where I come from, you are so careful not to trespass on somebody else's property because there's a really good chance you could just get shot, you know? And so when that started happening in Pioneertown, you know, with my background, I just was always so shocked. Like, do you not have any fear of any repercussion? Because where I come from, that's like one thing. Like, you don't even have to have a no trespassing sign. You just don't go in on somebody's property. So
Sure.
Yeah.
Stacey, when you moved to Pioneertown, you were there for about 2 years,
Yeah.
kind of mid through endish of the pandemic.
Mm.
Did you sense that there were kind of these unspoken rules? How did you know to be
Very
a
much.
community member of
Well,
Pioneertown?
I lived on the sort of, I didn't live exactly in Pioneertown. I lived sort of on the edge. I lived at right the beginning of town, and I feel like I just sort of had a view of the entire town, which was kind of metaphorical. But I felt definitely there were unspoken rules, like wave at everybody you pass by. Um, don't bring your farmer's market or your Trader Joe's bags to the local gross out. I was very careful. I just felt like I felt like there were things about, I didn't want things about me to appear to anybody else to, have them judge me in any way. And that was never judged. Everybody was always great, even though you see a lot of bumper stickers on people's cars that say go back to LA. I never actually experienced anything, but I was definitely aware of it and conscious of how I was perceived.
I think that, Stacey, you had kind of, as we were talking before, asked, kind of proposed a really great question, which is, does part of living in the desert, existing in the desert, mean just kind of by the laws of life that you do have to cater to tourists, that it is?
As like a symbiotic relationship. Yeah. What do you
yeah.
think about that, Sue?
Well, my business is all based on tourism. I run a little boutique motel. So, and I don't mind tourists. Um, I like it. I like the fact that I can go to work on any given day and meet somebody from Hong Kong or, Oslo or Berlin or London or Australia, and I'm happy that people want to come here. I mean, we have a beautiful 800,000 acre national park that everybody should come and see. And it is a quirky, cool place. Like, to me, the desert is what it is. So, my biggest complaint about the big influx is not just somebody having a photo shoot in my yard, but somebody coming here and saying, like, we need Trader Joe's. Where do you buy your groceries? At the damn grocery store, where every other human buys. What are you? Is your intestinal tract so special that you have to buy food at a certain place? Just eat some damn food. And and if that were to continue here, and I'm going to talk about that overlay in Pioneertown, we can come back to that in a minute. But if that continued, where all the new people that come here need it to be like the place they came from, then what is it going to end up being but just another place that looks like every other place in the United States? Because I travel a lot, and I try to go to places that don't look like every other place. I don't want box stores. I don't need to go to Whole Foods. I don't need to go to Trader Joe's. And when I travel, I want to go somewhere that still has some character, some regional character, or that that's has some history still attached to it, or is kind of funky or different or unusual. And so I'm not opposed to tourism at all. I think it's great. I think there's a lot more people that are gainfully employed here. Almost all of my friends are like myself. They own a small business that they work really hard at. Nobody's getting rich here. We are just able to live in the desert and make a living. And that hasn't always been that way. And there's a lot of people here that make a much better living that grew up here. Kids, my friend Mara Lee has the Roadrunner Cafe next to the visitor center, and she employs local kids that grew up here. And it's great that people can actually have a good job here and they make good money. I mean, that's a whole nother topic. Can anybody live on what they make at a restaurant job or whatever? But I see good things about tourism here. The bad things I see are like things that Stacey highlighted in the article. There's a lot of people that came here, especially around between 2016 and right up to the pandemic, 2020, when it really blew up. And they were speculators and investors. I call them carpetbaggers. That's my word for them. I know it's a very old-fashioned word, but it just fits. And they were these people that came here. They had like money signs in their eyes. They had grand schemes. Like Clark was going to do the 25,000 people amphitheater. And I remember one day Robin telling me she met this guy that says he's going to have a 25,000 person amphitheater right there in Pioneertown. And I'm just like, no, that's never happening. But does he do any due diligence at the county? Does he know anything about the process at the county? People buying up residential properties here and then trying to do commercial enterprises on them. Well, you're never going to get a permit. And why does everything have to be so grand? Stacey and I talked about it in the article. Why does every restaurant that opens have to be a Sunday market and a roller skating rink and a this and a that? It's like, can we just have a restaurant where we go and order really good food? And that's what Pappy's was.
Something about the desert makes people have these grand schemes. Like when I first met Clark in the all bar situation, it wasn't just enough for it to be a little bar with a restaurant and then it had to be a swim club, then it had to be this, then it had to be that. There's something about the desert that I think people see a lot of wide open space.
Yeah.
And I think
they see a lot of, okay, this is what happens, and it's still happening today. Somebody called me yesterday and said, have you met the girl that's going around town telling everybody she's come to save Joshua Tree? Just because it isn't happening here doesn't mean it's because nobody thought of it. It's because maybe we don't want it to happen, or maybe it's really difficult to make stuff happen in an unincorporated part of the largest county in the United States, so it's like almost like the savior complex sometimes, like they're going to come in and save the town and they're going to do these grand things and they're going to make a bunch of money. And so far, I haven't seen it happen. you know? But nobody realizes that when they come. They think they're inventing the wheel, you
Yeah, they
know?
think they're the first person to have that idea.
Yeah. And so for us, when I came here, I didn't come here thinking I have this grand scheme of wanting to turn this into some kind of Disneyland or something or make my fortune. I came here and I saw, oh, this is Pioneertown, this tiny little town. I can go to the post office, which I still do today, and see my 90-year-old neighbor who still drives her, 67 Ford Galaxy from Parsons Ranch. She that's Jeannie Parsons. She has passed away in the last few years, but I loved her. She still had her 80s igloo coolers in the back seat. She had been living up there for years in the back of Pipes Canyon, off grid with her husband. And that's like a real pioneering person. That's what was attractive to me. And I certainly had no idea of like changing any of that. I wanted to just coexist in that kind of smaller community that didn't have any stores, and it wasn't all about what you can buy or how much money you make or what kind of car you drive, or it was about your community, and it was about nature because we live in a place that's really beautiful, and it was also kind of about a place that nobody else wanted to go, which appealed to me.
Mhm.
Yeah. What
And
is,
now that's changed.
can you tell us a little bit, Stacey had alluded to this and mentioned it in her article. What is the Main Street overlay?
Well, so Main Street, which is spelled Mane, like a horse's mane,
Yeah.
is it's a little dirt road that this movie set town was built on. It's not paved. It doesn't have any sewage system, everything's on a septic tank. And there's no street lights. It's exactly pretty much how it was built. And I don't know why. Well, mostly because for a long time, the state decided that our water wasn't drinkable in Pioneertown. And if you really want to get down to brass tacks, that's why Pioneertown has stayed the same way for a really long time. And the county just kind of, I don't know, they ignored that for 2 or more decades. And so you couldn't get a water meter, so you couldn't build unless you wanted to dig a well or whatever. So about 5 or 6 years ago, the state forced the county to fix that. And so they laid a pipeline that goes all the way. Our water came from a well up above my house. And I miss it, to be honest with you, because now we have a pipeline in Yucca Valley that brings water up. So now that's why you're seeing houses are being built, because they will give out water meters. At one time, there were only 100, 105 water meters. So what also happened is that somehow the county changed. I don't know the specifics. I know that Ben Loescher, who's an architect that lives in Pioneertown, has really taken on the task of, he created this overlay. So what could happen now, because of the way the county shifted the zoning,
There's been a
that
change that would allow for possibly,
possibly
new, a new, change
development.
development. Yeah.
Right. And the development would follow the overall county guidelines for land use.
Right.
So, worst case scenario, imagine, a little tiny movie set town that looks like the Wild Wild West. And then somebody built a Starbucks or I don't know, a Circle
Yeah.
K with the big lights, and they would have to pave the parking lot, and you have to have, all of that is a part of, the process that you go through for the county, so many parking spaces and curb height and entrance and exit and all of that. And so Ben saw that was happening, and he created an overlay which would say no, that things could, the setbacks wouldn't have to be this, because then you'd have a setback and you'd have, like the bank and the jail, and then you'd have a 25-foot setback and some corporate structure built or something. That's, I think, was the big fear. And so he created this overlay that gave these guidelines so that if there was development in Main Street, specifically in Pioneertown, it wouldn't look weird and odd.
It would have to be aesthetically in line with what's there, and it couldn't touch certain things like you couldn't get rid of any, I think if this is right, it couldn't get rid of any horse hitching posts and things like that. And any
Right.
development would have to coexist and look like what's already there.
Right. Which, you know, the county has I don't think I don't even know if they've recognized that overlay. And we live in a
As
big
I know,
county.
there's been no movement on any of it.
No, that's what I'm saying. I don't even know. That's something that he presented as like, look, I've done all this work.
Yeah.
This is how this could work this way if you'd adopt this.
Yeah, and it has a lot of community support, but I don't think anyone at the county's really looked at it yet. Or
Well, and you know, you have to remember our county seat is an hour and a half drive away. We are governed by a board of supervisors. We have a supervisor, Dawn Rao, who represents our district, but she represents many other parts of the county, you know, because the county is huge. And it's really hard to get noticed here if you if you want to make changes. That's why I call myself the complainer, because I like to call and I like to, you know, we don't have code enforcement. We have code enforcement in the county of San Bernardino, but we don't have any code officers. Although I talked to somebody a couple of weeks ago that said they've allotted a job for a local code enforcement person, but nobody wants the job. That's what they're saying now.
I nominate you.
Yeah. But so the only way that anything gets noticed here is if you complain. Like they will tell you that at code enforcement in San Bernardino County, like, no, we're not doing anything about that. We don't know about it. The only way we know about it is if somebody files a complaint. And I learned that years ago. So I just started filing complaints. And, you know, I have a lot of friends that are like, you're like the police or something. You're like the sheriff. And I'm like, well, you know, yeah, it is subjective what I decide to complain about, but I don't really care. You know, like if you live behind me and you buy the house behind me and my sweet neighbor moves away, who had horses and donkeys and dogs, she was so lovely, and then you buy the house and then you send me a message that says we're going to turn this into a weekend retreat spot. Well, I'm going to say, no, you're not, because that's not legal. That's a residential home and you can't run a commercial business there. And you know, that's just how I feel about it, because I don't want to live next to the hypnotherapy retreat center that the Teslas drive up to every weekend. I mean, where I live, if you stood on a porch at her house and had a very quiet conversation, even though I might be 3 acres away, I would hear it all. You know, it's very quiet there. So, you know, hopefully the county might pay attention at some point to the overlay, and maybe they won't, because they lean to the right, and they're the kind of government that, you know, they believe in less government, I guess, you know, on the surface, that's what they say. So, you know, so far nothing has happened, you know, like I don't see any buildings. Some guy wanted to build a 12-unit Airstream camp right on Main Street in a little tiny lot. And initially, I think the land use passed it on to the planning commission. But I went and looked at it one day and he didn't have enough parking. And he said he was going to have 24/7 valet so that they could piggyback cars. And I'm like, he's just saying that. He's not going to have somebody sitting out on Main Street waiting for the 8 cars to show up so they can move them around. And then all of a sudden I noticed, like 6 months ago, he had the property up for sale and it sold last month. So, you know, that's one of those guys. He had the grand scheme, but he couldn't actually make it happen.
Yeah, I saw a lot of that while I was there.
Yeah.
Speaking of people with grand schemes, Stacey has prompted me to ask you, Sue, about your conversation with Elon Musk.
Did I tell you I spoke to him?
I mean, since then?
No, I saw him on Main Street one day.
Yeah.
But I didn't speak to him. I might have like, said some little comment or something.
That's
Um,
speaking to him though. Isn't it?
but that was a long time ago too. That was in probably 2015. He was with Susan Sarandon
Was
and
he?
somebody else, and they were here for a wedding. If I saw
Oh,
Elon Musk on Main Street now, I'd have a whole lot of things to talk to him about.
I thought you ran up to him and said, "I hope you're not thinking of doing anything stupid in my town." No?
Maybe that was somebody else.
No, there's no way.
Could have been, was it Susan Sarandon? Could have been anyone.
I have you on tape, Miss Burnett.
Okay, okay.
Own it.
Um, I'm
I,
curious.
I will I will say something to just about anybody. So, um, yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
I am not the person to not say something. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm not shy about that. Um,
I
so
want to ask, we're over time, but so I want to ask one last question. With understanding that we love well-behaved tourists, Sue, tell us about your business that you operate. Plug it.
okay, so I run and operate a 5-room boutique motel that sits at Sunburst and Highway 62. And it has been a motel since 1953. It's really, really cute. A guy named Blake Simpson bought it in the early 2000s and he did a fantastic remodel. He had an amazing eye. It's very unusual. He used a lot of steel, a lot of reclaimed wood. It's just lovely. It has a gorgeous yard. It has these 70-year-old desert willow trees on the property, a pond. It's just a really magical place. And
What's it called?
I took over in 2013. I don't actually know. I think he had it operating a little bit. He was such a brilliant designer and he had such a great eye, but he really did not function very well in everyday life. Um, and so when I got here in 2013, I started operating it on a daily basis. And yeah, it's funny because I left big cities to maybe not work so much or so hard, and now I pretty much work every day of my life, but I get to do it in the desert, and I get to do it the way I want to do it. Do you know what
What's
I'm
the name of
saying?
your motel, Sue?
Mojave Sands.
Got it. We will send
And I
info.
think that's the way a lot of people, a lot of my friends feel. Yes, we didn't come here to make, our fortunes necessarily. We came here for a certain kind of quality of life that maybe a lot of other people don't understand, but it makes us happy. And I'll just tell you one story. I had a guy come with his wife from England once to the motel, and he was probably in his 60s and lived right in London, and his wife had reached out to me. I think she was an American, and they didn't want to drive but they wanted to tour the park, so I booked him a little Jeep tour. And the day came for them to go and he would not leave the property because whatever was outside the fence, I have a Corten steel wall around the motel, so it's like a private little sanctuary in there. But we live in Joshua Tree. It's dirt roads, it's no sidewalks, no curbs, funky little houses, and
Nice.
maybe just the wide open space. It terrified him. He did not go on the park tour. And instead, he stayed at the motel and followed me around while I was doing my work, telling me everything I should do to my motel to change it, to make it better or something. Like, you need new, I have vintage furniture there. You need new furniture, blah, blah, blah. And finally, when he looked at me and said, well, you need plantation shutters on the windows. I said, that is never fucking happening. Go to your room. And he did. And then later he came to me and he's like, well, I just don't understand. And I go, we are what we are. We don't want to be something else. That's why we're here. That's how the desert is. The desert will decide, as Billy said in your article. The desert can chew you up and spit you out. The desert is not for everybody. It's not easy to live here sometimes, but sometimes it's amazing. I want to, if I have a minute, I want to read you a little quote. This is a book I found. It's called My Life on the Mojave, and it was written by Jean Paxton. She came here in the early 30s from Hollywood and lived in Yucca Valley. And this book is really, really cool. But this little poem, this little verse she wrote really describes the desert to me. And even though I didn't know about her before I came here, when I read this book, I was like, oh, this is the spirit of what I felt and what I am looking for and why I stay here. And she writes, there's a courage born with the morning. There's a faith that grows with the day. There's a peace that creeps in with the twilight, where the big heart of the desert holds sway. So for those of us that live here and love it, it has a really big heart and it's a really amazing place, but it's not for everybody. You said it in your article, Stacey, that the desert, you realize like, okay, it's the desert, you know?
It is a desert.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so maybe people will, I mean, I don't know, if you look at our real estate market, there's 500 Airbnbs for sale. And if you go and look at the history on them, most of them were bought in the last 2 or 3 years. So maybe a lot of people have figured out that, whoa, this is a desert and it requires a certain way of life. And
It's a
maybe
nice
it's
place
not
to
for everybody.
visit, as
Yeah,
they say.
come visit us. Yeah, and don't trespass. And don't throw your garbage, and don't
Don't have a
don't
photo shoot.
definitely
Not really
don't
a photo
graffiti
shoot.
anything that's natural and outside, not a rock, not a tree, not a cactus. Leave your spray paint at home, leave your leave your busy city attitude. Just come and breathe and relax and enjoy what's here for what it is.
Well, with that wisdom, thank you, Sue B, Stacey Grenrock Woods.
Thanks,
This
you
has been
guys.
so fun to talk with you both. Stacey, it's always so fun to talk with you. And Sue B, come back and hang out with all of us, or we will come to you.
Yeah, come visit us.
Yes, yes. Folks, before you leave, I want to invite you next week. We are going to do Ask a Clerk, which is, we've asked a bunch of different indie booksellers in the current issue of Alta, kind of pro tips, fun stories about weird books people have asked for, celebrity encounters, all sorts of kind of indie bookstore stories. We're going to have a roundtable conversation with 4 different independent booksellers. That's next Wednesday, April 24th, here at Alta Live at 12:30. I am so grateful to Sue and Stacey for joining us today, and of course to all of you for joining us. And with that, thank you both.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, bye, Stacey. Miss you.
Bye. I miss you too, Sue. I'll come see you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.